Are you looking to understand your restaurant insurance policy? Well, today we're talking about 5 things you need to check out and be aware of on your restaurant insurance policy. So, as a New York restaurant owner, we understand that you spend a ton of time, energy, effort, and let's not even get started about the blood, sweat, and tears in your restaurant and working it. Running a restaurant here in New York is not for the faint of heart, especially in New York City, with all of the constantly changing tastes of different people, bad Yelp reviews, etc. It's crazy. And we haven't even talked about insurance yet, which nobody wants to talk about insurance, but just because you don't want to talk about it doesn't mean you don't have to think about it. Here at GRBM, we want to deliver easy to understand explanations and get you the proper coverage at the right price. Having the right coverage is critical because inevitably something is going to happen in your restaurant that results in a claim, whether that be a slip and fall, a power outage that causes food spoilage, or worse, some sort of wage and hour dispute. There's a whole host of problems. Did I mention a kitchen fire? Forget about it. So having the right insurance is absolutely as critical as how good your food is. The number one thing to check out on your insurance policy is the liability limits. Now, some people will recommend lower than $1 million in liability coverage. However, at GRBM, we always recommend at least $1 million in liability coverage for your restaurant. So what does liability cover? Well, liability is the portion of the coverage that applies to most of those things that I just mentioned, slips and falls, etc., which are the most common restaurant claims. Speaking of claims, how much liability is enough to pay those claims? Well, that all depends. I'm going to be honest with you, we've seen claims start paying out higher and higher and higher in the last year. That being said, we are encouraging our clients to purchase a $2 million per occurrence policy. Typically, that is only slightly more expensive than a standard $1 million policy, and it provides an additional $1 million in coverage, which is huge. That being said, sometimes even a $2 million policy is not enough. If you're running a high traffic, high volume business, $2 million could get eaten up because that is for the entire 12 months. If you're having a lot of incidents or your building requires additional limits, those are available. It's pretty easy and inexpensive to stack an umbrella on top of your general liability policy. Another very important thing to consider and look for on your insurance policy is business income coverage. In a nutshell, business income provides income to the business in the event you are closed due to a covered loss. Now that could be an extended power outage, it could be a kitchen fire. At the end of the day, business income will pay those necessary and required expenses to keep your business afloat while you're shut down. So for example, paying for the manager who's not actually working because there was a kitchen fire, but you don't want to lose that manager. Those sort of things are covered by business income, in addition to the profit that you, as the owner, would have earned during that time. Speaking of being closed, another super important coverage to keep in mind and look for on your policy is spoilage coverage. More often than not, and especially with recent events that happened here where I am in Brewster, we had a ton of food spoilage claims. We had power outage for almost a week. When that happened, if you did not have food spoilage coverage, you would not have any coverage on your policy. Now, food spoilage is typically not subject to a deductible. So it's going to have a sublimit of maybe $5,000, $10,000, or even $25,000, but you generally speaking do not have a deductible on that. So you're going to get reimbursed for all of your food that was spoiled while the power was out, etc. Super important so that when you do reopen, you're not digging into your own pocket to restock the fridge. Sticking along those same lines as far as spoilage goes is your building insurance and contents coverage. If you happen to own the building, ensuring that and making sure it is properly covered for the right amount to rebuild in the event there was a loss is super important. But more often than not, restaurants we find don't actually own the building, but you do need to make sure your contents are insured. That table and chairs, which might not seem like a big deal now, but if you had a fire and half of your tables and chairs were broken or burnt, would you have the funds to replace them? Probably not without insurance. So making sure you have the adequate limits of both building coverage and contents is super important. I should also mention it's really not that expensive to make sure you have the proper amount of coverage. The difference in premium every year for $50,000 in contents or $75,000 in contents is going to be relatively insignificant. And I can tell you, when something happens, you're going to be thrilled that you had the correct amount of coverage instead of having to pay that extra $25,000 out of pocket. One last super important coverage for you to consider and look for on your policy is liquor liability. Now, liquor liability sounds fancy, but in the end, all it is protection for your business in the event that a patron in your restaurant or bar becomes intoxicated and does something wrong. Without liquor liability coverage, that loss will be excluded when they start to sue you. And inevitably, they will sue you. They will find out where that person had every drink that got them drunk. We have seen where someone who did not really overserve got dragged in, even though they were just one of the many stops on that person's journey of the night. So having proper limits for liquor liability and just making sure you have liquor liability is insanely important. And I can tell you this, if your policy has $100,000 in liquor liability, forget it, that's not enough. At the very absolute bare minimum, if you're opening a tiny little restaurant, we would recommend $500,000 in liquor liability coverage, but more often than not, we encourage you to take out at least $1 million in coverage. $1 million in coverage will generally provide an adequate limit in the event something happens. At the end of the day, you just need to protect the investment of time, money, and energy that you've put into your restaurant. And getting the right insurance is a huge part of that. Sometimes we'll be able to save you money. Sometimes we're going to recommend coverages that might actually drive your premiums up a little bit. But we are looking out for you to properly protect your business. If there's anything I can do or any of the other restaurant insurance agents here at GRBM, please feel free to give us a call or hit that contact form below. Thanks guys, take it easy.